Hello again. I'm beginning to think that I'm going mad or something. Maybe this is what the onset of Alzheimer's is like. All around me, I see things which look to me utterly bizarre, and yet nobody I meet seems to notice anything different, let alone anything wrong. I think it must be me. If I walked out of the house right now, carrying a loaded revolver, the worst that could befall me was that I would be sent to prison for 7 years. I hasten to assure viewers I have no intention of doing any such thing, obviously. If I indecently assaulted a 5-year-old girl, I might be sent to prison for 10 years. That's the maximum penalty for indecently assaulting a young person under the age of 14. This is the same maximum sentence which I could receive for visiting Lisbon and then returning to Britain without mentioning this holiday excursion to the authorities. The worst thing of all is that this extraordinary penalty for an unauthorised holiday has been imposed not by a new law passed after discussion in Parliament that goes through all the usual processes of being examined by the Lords as well and all the rest of it, but by a government minister simply signing a decree. That's how laws are made these days in Britain, by government decree. In this case, I am irresistibly reminded of the old Soviet Union, where it was of course illegal to leave the country without obtaining permission from the government. How we used to shout about such restrictions during the Cold War, and now we're doing far worse things to our own citizens, and as I said, nobody seems to notice. Have people really forgotten how awful regimes are which limit the freedom of their citizens and cannot be held to democratic account for this? What's that you say? We live in a democracy? Well, yes, technically that is of course true. However, I'll come to that in a little moment. A decree is passed which says that I cannot visit my grandson for Sunday dinner or invite him over to my house, and this is accepted without question. All the schools and libraries in the country are shut down by decree, and that's seen as being just one of those things. The police stop people from throwing snowballs or using toboggans. We just shrug. If anybody thinks that this hideous, really, extension of government interference in our private lives will end in the summer, they are completely wrong. They must be cuckoo. Coming back to the subject of Britain being a democracy, I will mention now that there is essentially a choice between two political parties to run the country, Labour or Conservative. Yes, I'm aware of things like the Patriotic Alternative and of various other fringe parties. Essentially, when we vote at the next election, it will be either Labour or Conservative. Both of those parties endorse this terrible end to freedom. And so whatever we vote at the next election, however we exercise our democratic freedom to vote, it won't make any difference at all. All these decrees will remain on the statute book forever. Even if they are forgotten, it means that we have accepted in principle that the government can forbid us to visit any country which they choose at any time they feel like, just like the Soviet Union. Is everybody happy about that? I'm not personally, but as I say, I think this must be some sort of mental problem that I have with the situation. What we have seen in the last year is a seismic change in how the world works. And in Britain, we have seen people roll over, accept without question some of the most dreadful restrictions on civil liberty which have been witnessed in this country since the days when Oliver Cromwell was sending soldiers out to make sure that people weren't having plum pudding with their Christmas dinners. I cannot forbear to mention an aspect to this which some people might have missed. If I travel to France and while there make a little trip across the Pyrenees to Portugal and Spain, and then return to France and book a passage home to Britain without telling anybody about my Portuguese weekend, I can receive the same prison sentence as if I broke into a house with the intention of raping the occupant. That is to say, 10 years imprisonment. If, on the other hand, I have made my way overland from Africa, passing through a dozen of the countries on the so-called red list relating to coronavirus, and then simply hop in an inflatable dinghy and cross the channel, then I'll be met with open arms, given a hot meal, put up at the taxpayer's expense, and then find myself on the waiting list for a council house. Obviously, the world cannot really be as mad as this, so the only other possible explanation is that it is I who have gone off my head.